Send that through to. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. If you are watching us live or if you're watching us on catch up, we are so glad to have you here for our third and final lunchtime conversation around faith, mental health, and the church. So for those of you that haven't joined us yet, let me just give you a little bit of context. So this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and every year there is a theme of some sort, and the theme this year is community. And for Christians, community often equals church. They are often one and the same thing. So we wanted to really tackle the big questions around faith, mental health, and the church. So on Tuesday, we started with our first one where we asked the big question, is mental health still a taboo subject in the church? And we had a really great conversation around that. It's all recorded. So if you haven't had a chance, feel free to go back and watch that. It's an hour and a half, but flipping heck, we pack a heck of a lot into that hour and a half. So it really is worth going back and having a listen to that. And then yesterday, we wanted to springboard off those discussions and ask for a church that really wants to remove the taboo and remove the stigma, which I genuinely believe is almost every church. What are the challenges that we're going to face when we try and do that? There's lots of logistical challenges, there's theological challenges, there's personal challenges, there's leadership challenges. And so yesterday we had an opportunity to talk around all of those. And today we've got the kind of unenviable task of trying to draw all of this to a conclusion. So we're going to be reflecting on some of the themes that came out of that. And we're going to try and, towards the end of it, start to get hyper practical. Like, what are the things that we can start to do that are going to make a difference, that are going to start to change the landscape when it comes to faith, mental health, and the church. And I'm really pleased to welcome Draz, Tasha, and Paul to this conversation. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to start to reflect on this big issue of faith, mental health, and the church. So, Draz, can I start with you? Can you give us a little bit of introduction as to who you are, and if you have a particular view on this question of mental health, is it still a taboo within the church?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you've gathered from first three words, I'm not a native English speaker. I'm originally from Slovakia, but I've been living in the UK for over 18 years now. So my story, don't want to make it very extensive, but just to going to the point. 18 years ago, we came to England, and I worked as an IT consultant in various places, and eventually in 2017, that was the time when I worked as a network security consultant in London, and with my wife and children, we lived in a rented house in Buckinghamshire, in very, very nice area. The work which I was doing was something what I liked, and which was providing for us more than necessary. So we lived very kind of comfortable life, and then the Lord has called us to leave all that behind and join and live in a Catholic community in England. And now at this moment, I'm in the north of England, in Cumberland, and we as a community have a house here, and there are 5 families living together with children, and we participate on the mission. When people ask me, what do you do? Usually I say I'm a full-time missionary, because that's what people can somehow picture. But what we actually do is, what's the calling of our community is to live in the communion with the Lord and together as brothers and sisters in the community, and then serve to the people. So in 2017, we kind of received that call, and we approached the community and said we would like to kind of join and live residentially. The community discerned and said, yep, let's come and join us. So in September we came, and we had a honeymoon before coming. That was kind of the feeling in which we were, and that was a very, very dramatic moment, which I even didn't anticipate it at all. I was thinking, when people ask me, what are you doing? You've got your career, you've got, 6-digit income, you have no problem. Why are you going to live off Providence? Why are you laying everything down? You've got kids, invest into them. Don't be poor. And I said, no, I'm going to live my dream now. The Lord has called me. I answered, and we are here. So this was before we came, but I didn't realize, and that was out of my naivety, that pretty much everything will change, except of my wife and my 3 children. Everything changed. I stopped working. I moved somewhere else. I left the friends, 300 miles away from here, and everything changed. The lifestyle changed. Everything was different, and in my enthusiasm, I was kind of feeling like I'm so holy. This will be a dream, and this will be a walk in the park. But I wasn't so holy, and the reality of this kind of change in my life, where pretty much all the carpets were pulled from underneath my feet, and I realized that, oops, this is bigger than I thought. And there is no regret in my voice. I'm just trying to describe the reality which hit me hard, and that was obviously from God's provision, because he wanted me, I presume, to get through that, to be able to feel with other people who might be struggling, and it all kind of culminated few years back when I was sitting down with my friend who is a priest, and he said, "Draz, you look really depressed," and I was kind of hit hard by the reality, and at that time, for me, that was like a no, I don't want that. That this is not a word in my vocabulary. That's not good. But he said, well, it's not a shame to reach out for a help if it's needed. So I said, okay, yeah, what can I do? And he advised first steps from NHS. And I thought that will take ages. It took like 6 months to get me on the list. And then I started some sessions, which were really very good. The lady, the therapist, was very understanding. I was coming from my kind of religious background. She was not religious, but she was good. And some things have been resolved. And then, that finished, and I started to live freer and kind of more joyful. But again, there were other things which were kind of weighing down on me. And then my wife came from a conference where Ariana Walker was one of the speakers, and she was mentioning the Freedom Journey course. And I just applied and got accepted. And then Paul was my mentor, or a facilitator. So for 16 weeks, we were kind of journeying together. And I would say the Freedom course was the thing in my journey to learn how to navigate in life when things got harder, when your emotional life and mental life is kind of being under stress. He gave me tools, or the course gave me tools to use to kind of get out from dips and get back up. So now, as a former attendee of this course, I'd say, life hasn't changed. The life is still what it was, but now it's not as severe as it was before. because I learned to uncover certain things in my life which were bringing the negative things into my thought processes, and especially when I realized how many lies I believed in my life. And that was something, and with Paul we were unpicking it bit by bit, and I realized, well, this is not leading me anywhere. So that's a bit of my journey. My perception of how the mental health is being seen in the community, I would say that's not a taboo anymore. That's my experience. Not that it's across the board, but in my kind of little world, it's not something what's been like pointed with a finger. It is something what nobody is proud of. And fair enough, who wants to struggle, who wants to be the weak? But on the other hand, I do receive support, from the community in which I am, and I think it is very, very important to be in integrity. When I wasn't doing great, I came to my leader and I said, well, this is where I am. I'm starting this journey of a freedom course. And, I just for you to know that if you see me being not very much myself, you might know what's going on. But I would say if we sweep things under the carpet, they tend to grow. They never die. And that's even worse. That's even worse. So that was a not short introduction of myself.
No, Draz, that was amazing, and I've got so I've got so many questions for you, and I think it's really interesting because your story is not dissimilar to some of the others that we heard yesterday and on Tuesday, where people have had lived experience of navigating their own struggles. But I think the fact that you are living quite a different lifestyle, you're doing church in quite a different way. I think the fact that your conclusion is that actually no, I really don't feel like it's a taboo in my context is one I'd love to unpack, because I feel like there's probably loads of wisdom and insight there because of how you're so intentional about doing community that we as a church body could really learn from, and hear more about. So I'd love to get there in a minute. Tasha, let's jump over to you. I'd love to hear a bit about your story, your experience, and then after that we'll spend a little bit longer covering over some of the ground we covered over the last couple of days in terms of where the issues are. And then we'll jump into reflecting on some of the things we've seen and heard. But Tasha, over to you. Tell us a bit about your story.
Hi guys, so my name's Natasha, but everyone just calls me Tash or Tasha. So I had an encounter with Jesus 17 years ago. I wasn't looking for Jesus. I certainly wasn't looking for God or anything like that. I had a rough start in life, which then kind of played out through my young years. And then I was an adult recovering from my childhood. So I masked that pain of the adoption and then the abandonment and everything that came with that life with drugs. So I started out partying drugs, as you do, because we always start somewhere. And I started out with the pills and the coke and the weed, which then led into me being handed a crack pipe one night, and I took that pipe, and it cost me 15 and a half years of my life. Along that path to come down off the crack, because you always need a downer, I became an alcoholic. I luckily, by the grace of God, didn't get addicted to heroin, even though I'd used it multiple times. It just wasn't for me. So along that journey, I'd lost my children, lost my house, lost my job, lost my car, lost my morals, my principles. I was doing things that you're probably watching a film. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Trainspotting. It was literally that life. That's where you end up going to, on crack and heroin and alcohol, unfortunately. And along that journey, I also lost my mind. I was a manic depressant and a paranoid schizophrenic, obviously drug psychosis, things like that, when you're not sleeping for days on end and you're going without sleep for weeks at a time because you're constantly you're constantly trying to stay high. And the reason you're trying to stay high is because you're escaping your reality. You're escaping reality and you're masking the pain. But as soon as you come down, you're having to deal with your reality and you're having to deal with the heartache and the pain. So you're constantly trying to stay high. My mental health was shot. I was on all kind of different meds, seeing all kind of different doctors. I'd been down every avenue there was possible to go down and nothing was working. My first daughter was born 5 weeks prem in a pool of blood. And then after that, I managed in my own strength to do 6 months clean. However, the partner that I was with went back, which then takes you back. In the end, I left her in a trap house and my mum had to take her off me. Same thing for my second daughter. Fast forward now, I was on the streets of Luton going to meet my crack dealer, and there was a church out. And I thought, oh, here go these Bible bashers. You know, they're at it again. I was waiting in a queue to go to the cash point. The lady comes out of the cash point. It was a baking hot day, and she came out and she was like, excuse me everyone, this cash point is broken now, everyone from this queue please join the end of this line. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to listen to these guys even longer. So here I am, God had a plan. So I'm stood in the queue and I'm waiting, and then this guy gets on the mic and he grabs the mic and he says, it doesn't matter where you've gone. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter how far you've gone. Jesus loves you and he wants to heal you today. And I'm stood there and I'm like, all of a sudden, I started feeling this peace and this love that I'd been searching for from when I was a little girl. And I was like, oh no, don't start, Tash. Maybe having one of your episodes, you don't want to get sectioned here. I'm looking around seeing that nobody else is having any of these kind of things. They're all looking quite normal. So I'm like, no, it can't be right, Tash, just come on. But that love started sinking in, you see, because I'd built the Great Wall of China around my heart and I could feel it penetrating in. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is this Jesus guy real? Like, could this Jesus guy love a crackhead, thief, prostitute like me? Could he love me? Is he come for me? Like, anyway, lo and behold, I took the money and I thought, no, I'm going to carry on walking. It was then at that point the Holy Spirit arrested me and I heard the sweetest voice I heard in all my life. And trust me, I've heard many voices. I know what it's like to have hell inside my head. I've heard the demons and I've seen them. You see, what people don't understand is when you take drugs, the veil that sits between the natural and the supernatural is pulled back. I've seen them. I know they existed. I knew that existed before Jesus Christ existed. So here I was, and this voice said, my precious daughter, this is not my portion for you. You know, and I set before you life and death. That's all I could hear was life and death. And I knew that measure of eternity that God has put in each of our hearts. It was like all of a sudden I knew. I turned round, I walked back over to this lady thinking, I hope no one doesn't see me going over to these lot, you know, I've got a reputation to uphold, you know how it is. I tapped her on the shoulder. She turned around, she went, hi, how are you? And I'm thinking, why are you so happy? No one's happy where I'm from. But I didn't know she had the joy of the Lord. So as we're talking now, she's like, these are our services and these are our times. So I went back home. I said to my baby father at the time, I said, I'm going to church tomorrow. Well, he scoffed. He laughed at me because he's from Jamaica. So he was made to go to church. He was made to go. He knew the Bible back to front, but you can be in church all your life and still miss Jesus, you know? So here I was. I went to church the next day. I walked in and see everyone looking all nice. I thought, oh, I've come to the wrong place. And she saw me. She was like, oh, you came. I was like, I came. She pulled me in. My anxiety's through the roof. I've got all these tormenting voices speaking to me. And I was like, oh my gosh. Then the pastor preached. I have a 3-second attention span. I've locked off from the first word that he said. I'm sitting there now. And at the end, all I remember is that it came to the end. I'm thinking, thank God, I need to get out of here. And he says, I'm gonna open the altars. If there's anyone here that would like to come to the front and say the prayer of repentance, please come. Next minute, this lady's grabbed my arm. Come on, dear, we're going down the front. I was like, oh my gosh, we're going down the front. She took my arm. She said, get down on your knees. Repeat this prayer after me. I said that prayer not knowing anything. Well, I just said it. I thought, things can't get any worse, Tash. So I said the prayer. I got up from there. Everyone in the whole church must have took my number. I'd eaten their tea and coffee and their biscuits. And I left. And as I left that building, I took a breath. And the only way I can describe it to you is, you know, because we all look about the same age here. So we'll remember the old school TVs. Then they brought in HD. Yeah, it was like HD. I could see the grass. I could see the blue in the sky. It was like creation. It was talking and it was moving. And then I realized there was no more depression. There was no more of them tormenting voices. There was no more shame from the wicked things that I'd done to feed my habit, abandoner of children, a thief, a liar, a manipulator, and other things. It had gone. It had all gone. I went home. I got rid of them crack pipes. I severed every tie to my old life, and then I carried on. That was it. 3 times a week I was in church. I was laying hands on the cat. I was praying for anything that could move. I was there. Whatever I could do, I was there. But fast forward, unfortunately, 10 to 12 months into now my walk with the Lord, I'm in church. We're all worshiping. Along come this voice, and the voice said, "What are you doing here, Tash? You don't belong here. Look at these women. Look, they're all married. They all have the same father for their children, and they certainly haven't done the things you've done. And look how they speak. They're so highly educated. Look at you. You just don't belong here." And I sat there, and it was at that moment I looked around and I thought, you're right. I don't even know what I'm doing here. Because what had happened is I'd given agreement to that lie, and there's power in agreement, you see. I went home that night, and lo and behold, the devil sends someone knocking from my old life. He knocks on the door. He's like, "Where have you been? I've been looking for you. You've been gone about a year." I was like, "Oh, Jesus set me free." And he was like, "Oh, come on now, let's not do that." Anyway, I let him in. Lo and behold, that night, a cigarette to a drink, because they were opening doors from the drink. I had a pipe, and I was back for 6 years. Out of that 6 years, all I can say is God is truly married to the backslider. And he was with me every step of the way. He saw my heart in that. He knew I was back in chains, the mental health. I had another mental breakdown. And then after that, sorry, am I still there?
Yeah, you're still here, Tash.
Oh, sorry. After that, I had another mental breakdown. That's when God spoke to me about coming up north. Well, I didn't want to come up north. I was like, God, it's grim. They've got funny cobbled streets and they speak funny. Please don't send me up north. Please do not send me up north, Lord. Anyway, so he basically, sorry, my phone is playing up.
That's okay.
I don't know what is going on there. Can anyone see me? It's gone blank.
Yeah, we can still see you.
Lovely. Sorry. So at that point, God, I'm having counselling now with an atheist counsellor. And the thing about God is he uses broken people like me and you to reach broken people like me and you, you know, and I've gone in still loving my Jesus, even though I was in chains. And every time I went in there, I'd tell him about God and he'd say, I don't believe in God. And I'd be like, but God believes in you. And he'd be like, who is counselling who here, Tasha? Every time you come, you're doing this. I'm here to help you. Okay. And he'd get annoyed, but he loved me. He called me the lovable rogue, you know. And this one particular time was the last time I saw him. So God is now telling me to move up north. I am not going. And then I've had my appointment with him. We're in the session and he says to me, Tasha, I don't know why I've been up most of the night and I really feel you should move up north. I was like, God will use anyone to speak through. I packed my things up. I left half of the house down there and I moved up north. So I've been here 13 years now. Me and my 3 children, got all my children back, just to cut the story a little bit shorter. It's a bit of a big story. And then I met my husband in church, had twins. And then, to be honest, and I think this is where we're at, honestly, we all just need to be real to help other people. I married 2022, the marriage fell apart and I started struggling with mental health again. And it was like I felt a failure. The enemy had lied about everything you've done. Look at your life, Tasha. And it has been a journey from 2022. You know, we divorced, unfortunately, and I'm here now. And the stuff that I've learned, I'm so thankful for. But again, it has been a journey. But yeah, and that is, the enemy knew he couldn't get me with going back to the old ways in the sense of drink and drugs and, you know, that lifestyle. So he came and launched a full attack on my mind. And, you know, the battle has been fierce, but praise God, I'm coming out on the other side. So yeah, so that's my story.
Praise the Lord.
Ah, Tasha, that is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. What a story. I really appreciate your vulnerability and openness in letting us hear all of that and letting us kind of almost springboard off that and talk about big stuff, but in the context of your very personal story. So that's really brave, and I really commend you. And thank you so much for sharing all of that. Paul, you get to follow that. You get to sort of
Thanks for that, Tash.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm kind of speechless just listening to your testimony.
Yeah, we'll come back and kind of use, because you've got such different backgrounds, such different experiences, which is going to be great when we kind of really try and unpack this stuff. To have people with such different experiences of how they've journeyed with this stuff is really, really helpful. Paul, for the sake of people watching and listening who won't know much about you and what you do and who you are, do you want to give us a bit of your story in a nutshell and any perspective you have on this issue of faith, mental health in the church?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to share some thoughts. So I'm one of the facilitators here that delivers the Freedom Journey. So as Draz has mentioned, he was one of my participants. It's a great privilege to be able to do that, to see people come with all the various different life experiences and things that are going on, and see them journey and exploring their faith and relationship with God, themselves, others, and to look at things like mental health and mental fitness. My background that got me into that partly was a combination of being, very much involved in local church, all of my Christian life, but most of my adult life. I'm working in, pastoral settings and leadership, along with my job that previously, which was life and well-being coaching and business coaching, leadership coaching, which I did for years in various guises. That was born out of partly my own journey through challenges in my life, a near fatal illness, losing and changing my career, and meeting God in quite a dramatic way. So that all happened stemming back to my original life, which was being part of the British Armed Forces. Spent time with the Royal Air Force, the Marines, and had a great time, a very exciting life, but quite a traumatic life as well, including quite a lot of childhood trauma, which taught me a lot about being hyper vigilant. I grew up in a loving home with loving parents, but just with lots of different types of events, had lots of crises and accidents and some abuse and things in my life, that created this kind of sense of hypervigilance and awareness. But it also helped me develop some emotional intelligence. But I'd always wanted to be in the military, so I took the first opportunity to do that, and joined. I then had a spell where I was injured and had to go through quite a depressing time where I didn't know if I'd get back to that, but then eventually did rejoin, and yeah, I had a great time. Used that vigilance and determination to excel in that, and kind of leading on to a little bit about community. That's where I found my community. It was in the military. My brothers and sisters there. I loved it. I had a ball, no matter how stressful it was. But a lot of the other stuff I realised later down the line, probably when I was about 24. I'll be honest, I hadn't really expected to make it past 25. And I remember at 24, I was getting involved in ever more dangerous things. And it didn't matter whether it was military stuff, extreme sports, anything that I could think of, climb a mountain, jump out of a plane, all of that kind of stuff. And really, I realized that I was kind of tipping the edge a little bit, even to the point where my commanding officer begged me not to bring him any more paperwork for him to sign off on. He said, I can't bear another one. So from that, I mean, I had a lot of fun, but I also had, within that, a broken relationship, two young children, and all the stresses and strains of being away from family and, for lengths of time. And I was very much a hands-on father, so there was difficulty there. But again, leaning into that that community with my family, you know, the military family, I guess got me through. But obviously there were things going on under the surface in the background of my life, and I had a couple of episodes where I realized I was doing dangerous things, but I felt like okay when I was doing those. But afterwards, I'd hit like Tash describes, I'd hit these massive lows. So if I wasn't chasing the adrenaline or wasn't having the adrenaline, the dopamine hit, I would get really quite dark and withdrawn. But I masked it well. And also there was a genuine element of that. Is you probably don't notice it as much because you've got your mates. You know, you live, sleep, eat, work together. And you make that family work. Even the idiots, they are idiots. And if you don't know who the idiots are, well, you're probably the idiot. But yeah, we had that, and then I remember just before there was a particular conflict that wasn't really mainstream news at the time, but I'd seen the intelligence reports for it, and I volunteered for it. Um, and then it sounded like there was a very strong probability that some of us were going to get deployed. So I thought this was great, but then there was the other element of me thinking, you know, you signed up for it, you know that it's your job. You know, nobody's wanting to go out and start shooting people. It's not really about that. It's about protecting and serving. But then you do realize, hang on a minute, you know, I've got two young kids, and you've got to focus on the job at hand. But I remember being in the crew room this particular day, and most of us were there on shift. It was a day shift, and we were in the crew room just chit-chatting over a cuppa, and we were talking about all of these different things and conflicts. And somebody had said something along the lines of, you know, doesn't it like bother you that you could get shot, or, you know, that it's going to be really, really dangerous? And I was like, it's just, you know, what I'm trained to do. Like, kind of, I wanted to go and deploy, but I remember as this conversation was going on, I had the weirdest of experiences. It was almost like, I can't call it an out of body experience. It was more an inner body experience where my own there was an internal voice. It was my own internal voice, but I'd never heard it speak quite like this. And the question I had internally was, if I die tomorrow, will I definitely go to heaven? And it completely and utterly knocked me. It completely, you know, when something just seizes the moment. And I sort of went blank for a little bit, and then carried on with the chat. And we'd got on talking about God, and they're saying, well, you know, do you believe in God? I said, yeah. And then a few of the others said, yeah, I believe in God as well. But like I say, I've got this internal question, and then it just wouldn't leave me. It haunted me almost. Um, so I remember going back to my barracks, and I prayed, and I pulled my Bible out, and I started to read the Bible that I got when I was dedicated as a baby, um, which was an old gold leaf King James Bible. So, and I started in Genesis, so I didn't make it easy on myself. Um, but I started reading, and the more I read the scriptures, and I'd pray every night. But then I'd still be going out, you know, I'd be going out drinking and messing around and still doing all the dangerous stuff. I'd say, you know, nothing really changed in that sense. But often what I do is I'd be reading the Bible, and when I come back to my barracks, the Bible would be turned over to a page in the New Testament. And I'd be like, oh, that's a bit odd. I'm pretty sure I was in Leviticus or whatever. And this happened several times, but I'd read the scriptures that the page was open, and they were all like what would now be the red lines. They were all about Jesus. And this went on for quite a while. And after a while, I was like, all right, God, I get it. It's all about Jesus. And then bizarrely, didn't really do much about that. I did go to church to see if I could speak to someone, but church was always closed. And you might bump into a padre or whatever. But then this one particular evening, I remember going out and thinking, gosh, sorry, but I missed it. There's a bit of a gap there, actually. In between that, I went on a deployment. I'd met some Christians, um, and then I went on a deployment. And I remember we trekked up a mountain, and we did this every day. And on the drive in, it was just spectacular. You'd have to drive to get to the bottom of the mountain pass. And as you drive up, we had two wagons full. There was about 14 of us, I think. And you have to drive up this mountain pass, it's full of ancient trees. And when you drive up, you have to put your headlights on because it goes so dark. And then I remember as we were driving up, we're listening to Bryan Adams' greatest hits. I'll never forget it. We had all the Summer of '69 and all the good ones. But this particular song came on, which is called "I'm Ready." And it goes, "I'm ready to love you." Um, and and as we're driving up, there's myself in the front and a mate of mine, Taff, who's a giant of a man. And we're the like really burly type military guys who love all the green, running around in the wood stuff. And you could see this little pinprick of light at the end of the tunnel, and you just couldn't make it up. And as we got closer, it just got brighter and brighter. And as we turned out at the top, it just suddenly opens up to the whole mountain pass with snow-capped mountains and the forests and everything. And I just burst into tears. I just felt the presence of God come. I knew it was the presence of God. I just fall in the car and I just started to weep. And I looked at my friend Taff, who was driving, and he's weeping as well. And he's looked at me and I'm looking at him. And he turned round to everybody else in the car and they were just reading and stuff. And he's like, if you can't feel that, you've got no heart. And that happened nearly every day after that. And I remember writing a postcard home saying to my family, I know what I want to do with my life. I want to live it for God. And then I got quite poorly on that. My knees started to hurt, and I had to basically crawl back down 22 kilometers on this mountainside because I couldn't walk. And then after that, I deployed back home, and I just got really, really. I started to get quite a lot of pain. Anyway, an even longer story short is I powered through in the way that I did and just went back to the same old lifestyle. And I was going out one evening, and I was on one of the busiest bases in the UK. There's about 10,000 people there. So you can imagine how bustling that normally was. But this particular autumn evening, it was really eerily quiet. And I was walking out my barracks, rounded the corner just on my way to the pub, and I felt this wind rustle up, and it just went really quiet, and all these leaves, and I knew God was coming for me. I just had this feeling that somehow God was coming for me, and sure enough, I felt the presence of God right in front of me, and the most biggest sense of love I've ever experienced in my life, like Tash said, but also the biggest sense of terror I'd ever experienced in my life as well. It's kind of so paradoxical. And I remember God spoke to me so clearly, audibly, and said, "Paul, what are you doing?"
Hmm.
And I just burst into tears because I knew that God knew what I was doing, and I knew that He knew I knew that. And that was just the one thing He audibly spoke, but He spoke into my heart really, really clearly. Then it's again like an out of time moment where He basically said, He showed me my life and said, "You've got to make a choice. You need to know my son Jesus, and you've got to make a choice because you're living your life in two camps, and it's time for you to make a decision." And he showed me, it's like my whole life flashed in front of me, showed me all the times I'd nearly died and how he'd protected me. And I'm talking dozens and dozens of times, all kinds of things. I remember once coming home on leave and there was a storm, and my mum had picked me up from the train station. And as I walked into the house, just towards the house, I got yanked back and looked round, couldn't see anybody, and a sheet of glass just went straight in front of me and smashed on the floor. And it had been blown out of the attic window and slid down the roof. I've been in multiple, I can't even remember how many major car crashes and all kinds of dangerous things in the military. And he just said like that, "You need to know my son Jesus." And then he went. But it's the first time I realized that the hand of God had always been on me because I felt him slightly remove it. I know now that he didn't actually remove it, but he wanted to let me know what that distance felt like. And it was heartbreaking and terrifying. So I went to the pub. After that, no, I did. I actually went to a church to try and go and speak to somebody who was closed. And I went the following day, I think it was, and there was a Bible on the doorstep of the church. So I went in and read it. And there was one of the elders in there and just came and said hello. And I said, "Oh, sorry, I picked this Bible." And she went, "Oh, somebody left it on the doorstep this morning. You can have it." And it was like a study Bible. So I took that and read. And then I got invited to a baptism of a friend of mine who was one of these Christians that I'd met. And she was going to her friend's baptism. And while that baptism was going on, I thought, gosh, I want to get baptized. And then there was an altar call. And I put so like my hand shot up in there. Somebody came and prayed for me. And I just felt like fire passed through my body. I got completely baptized in the Holy Spirit right there in that moment. And I remember just kind of hit the deck actually, and which was really unusual. And I had my son with me, who was only a young toddler, a baby, and my one of my friends was there. I sort of closed my eyes and just took in the moment. And when I sort of came round, my friend was holding my son and went, "Oh, welcome back." And I remember the first thing I said was, "Gosh, I feel so clean. I feel so clean." And I felt this lightness that I'd never felt before. And that was it. I was in the church, and that was the beginning of my life. Got poorly, nearly died, got healed. I mean, that is a very long story short, but then ended up leaving the military with my pension intact and honours through medical discharge, and then went on to do all the other things, and now I'm here. So again, a very long-winded introduction, but interesting, and it's introduced me to all you guys.
It's incredible to hear that, not long-winded at all. Like it's so incredible to hear these stories, and to hear what God's capable of. To hear, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It sounds like we've all three of you have had to journey some really significant stuff. Like these are stories of times of real hardship and trying to make sense of that. Um, I would love to ask all of you, when it comes to navigating that stuff in a church context or in surrounded by other Christians, and I'm aware there's a bit of a difference, which is great. Draz, did you grow up in a Christian home or in a Catholic home?
You don't want me to start on that very briefly. I'm from a communistic country. I was baptized in a secret because otherwise my parents, both teachers, would have lost their job. So,
wow.
So that was back then. So and on the baptism certificate, they put their right names but wrong addresses and jobs. So if anyone finds that baptism certificate, wouldn't be able to trace the people. No internet in 70s, and also it wasn't in my hometown, so it was somewhere far away. So answer is no. My parents were not practicing faith. My mum was until she studied in the uni, and then she was called in by the head of the party at school, and the guy said, "Well, if you'll be seen again in the church on Sunday, you are out of the school." So my mom had a choice to make, and after a long time, she came to the point like, okay, she will cease going to the church, but she will want to hold on to the faith. And that was in early 60s, I'd say, or 50s even. She kept her faith, and in 1989, when the Velvet Revolution happened and all the East Bloc crumbled, we were free to go to the churches again, and she resumed going to the church. But she's still going to the church, but she stayed in the kind of a traditional level, and which again I'm not despising at all. You know, we are where we are, but we lived in we had the values, I'd say, but we were not kind of practicing, and even, you know, we couldn't say in my country it's common that the gifts on Christmas brings baby Jesus. That's we say what we baby Jesus, but that was very religious. So we had to adopt the Russian kind of flavor of that, which was Grandpa Frost or something, if I translate it correctly. So my mom told me, you can't say anywhere outside that it was baby Jesus who brought you this. You have to say that it was the Grandpa Frost, so people won't be suspicious. So briefly, no, I wasn't. I found faith when I was 19 at the uni.
It's really interesting. So for all three of you, I think it's fair to say that your journey with navigating mental health and the things you've experienced in life has both happened inside and outside the church. You've all had an element of it out where you've had to navigate it personally outside of it. And then it sounds like you've all had journeys of then trying to navigate it within a church context and surrounded by other Christians. So I'd love to ask you, when you think about navigating it within a church context or in a community context, what are some of the things that people have said that you've found really helpful, that have really helped you on your journey in navigating this stuff? And what are some of the things that people have said that actually have been really unhelpful and destabilized you a little bit, maybe been difficult as part of that journey? Yeah, Tasha, can I start with you, if that's all right, if you don't mind me picking on you?
No, that's fine. So for myself, it's like before Jesus came into my life, obviously the route for me was going straight to the doctors, going straight to the NHS, getting the help there, getting on any meds that you could, including the drugs that you shouldn't be taking. And then once I was obviously in Christ, and this flare-up happened in 2022 through to the divorce, I found that in the church, it is a taboo. And I felt actually embarrassed and shamed, if that makes sense. I didn't know who to speak to about it. I spoke to a couple of pastors about it and people. And, their take on it is, well, you need to go and pray about that, Tash, which doesn't always work, because I was praying, I was seeking the Lord, and I have been, continuously. But one thing I have learned out of that now is that also, and I'm going to say this is just for me, I'm not putting that on anybody else, is that it's also my responsibility. It's my responsibility to take my own thoughts captive. So that's where I started to see the breakthrough, was the work that I kind of did on my own in my own time, along with people praying into it, along with having people that I trusted that could pray along with me, because it's awful when that flare up comes back. You don't know where to turn, So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Tasha. What about you, Draz?
Well, I would say I would start with the less helpful approaches within the church, which normally, and that's not uncommon, you need to pray harder, you need to have bigger faith, and if the results are not coming, that's because of you. And I was kind of listening to on YouTube various preachers on these things, and often I heard it's just matter of faith and you need to pray and this and that. Didn't help me, because I either didn't have the faith or there was something else wrong with me, and the results were not coming. What I found very helpful within the church, and that was with the people either around in the community or with the priest whom I mentioned, they said, well, there are always reasons for things, why they are as they are. And I realized that if your life is naturally not balanced, then you put strain on kind of one leg, and you can hold it on for a month or two or year or two or something, but one day it will just give in, and then all the load which was kind of buffered will knock you down. So what's helpful is when I got an advice, okay, so what you can do is try to go out, because I live and work in the same place, and often day after day I just don't leave my postcode because I don't need to, you know. Even the little is on the same postcode, so it's literally like a next door, so I don't get out. So it's still the same amount, same people, same situation, same everything. And there is a natural there are natural things which we can do which would naturally help our emotional and mental state. So I got an advice like, go out every day for 15 minutes for a really brisk walk. Or another one, you know, just do something twice a week what will make you sweat, so you can kind of let you can forget the things. And for example, the priest advised me, you know, Draz, you like gardening, just go and be in the dirt, you know, just do things, you know, grow plants. And that was really, really therapeutic for me. So the good things are, you know, to not to neglect the natural things. You know, I'm not lowering the value of prayer, but from our own experience, we see that not every time we pray, we see the results which we pray for at the moment. And that's a reality. That has nothing to do with the Lord, I think, like him not wanting to heal someone. That I don't think so. The Lord wants to heal. But what I see is the healing doesn't come the moment we pray. And that's a mystery. Suffering is a mystery in our lives, and we don't know.
Yeah, there's two things in there that you mentioned, Draz, that really came through quite strongly when we were in the last 2 days. And one of it is embracing the mystery and not feeling like we always have to have neat packaged answers, and actually leaving space for being okay with that. And then the other one is really taking a holistic approach and making sure that as churches, we are tending to the soul, yes, but also the mind and the body. And actually, when we try and separate out any one of those over and above caring about the other things, that's when we can over spiritualize issues, and that's where people often then feel stigmatized because that's the only thing that's being focused on, even though they know they've got mind issues going on and physical issues going on. So that's really helpful. Paul, what about you? Any things in your experience? And I think if we'll let's try and if you can try and answer them in just a few minutes, because I'd love to make sure we spend the last half an hour reflecting on some of the things we've heard over the last couple of days. But I would love to hear from you if there's any things in your experience that people said that was either helpful or unhelpful.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a relatively short answer, and you may have some questions on it, but its simple answer is a very mixed bag of an experience with regards to support generally, pastoral, but particularly around things like mental health and going through dark times, depression, call it whatever you will, is that actually depending on really taking it straight to something that Derek said, sorry, on the first day, that actually I think that sometimes it's not necessarily that you get a taboo response. I think sometimes it's more an exasperated response, in that some people realize they just don't know what to do with it. They don't not know what to do with somebody who's going through difficulty, particularly if it's somebody who's presented well or is well integrated within the church and maybe don't understand what's going on for you. I certainly have experienced going through things where people have been very much Job's friends. They have all the best intentions, and say, you know, well, you know, are you praying, are you reading your Bible? Have you thought about this? Go and do some exercise. My experience of people who are going through depression, grief, or lots of different difficulties like that, you're not likely to be bringing them too many new ideas. You know, they probably have prayed themselves nearly to death. You know, they've cried all the tears. They've you know, tried all of the things, and you know, even maybe gone and started a sport or a hobby or things. But if you're going through those things, sometimes getting out of your bed is a win. And I think that also Derek says, you know, about not taking a one size fits all perspective and approach on things. You know, I'm a different personality perhaps to Draz or Tash, you know, so we can't necessarily apply all of the same principles. And also, I think my experience is sometimes where people have tried to bring encouragement even or advice can actually create a lot of anxiety for somebody who's processing and going through a lot of stuff. And sometimes what you need is the response just to say that, look, you're still part of the community, you're part of our community, and we love and we care for you. Is there anything we can do to help? You know, and also then to pray and be humble enough to reach out if we don't have the expertise and find out if there's anybody who does, which is what happened for me. Um, and also to you know, treat that person as a unique individual and their personality type, and also to know and pray for the discernment from the Lord as to what is it that we're treating. As you mentioned, you know, about us being body, soul, and spirit. You know, if we're focusing all our attention onto the spirit, but the body is broken, or that, you know, there's something going on in our emotions, are we actually addressing the right thing? And that's why, you know, I get to do what I do, and I love bringing, you know, the freedom journey for people, because that's exactly what that does. It's God bringing the whole salvation experience to the spirit, to the soul, and to the body. So I think that, yeah, that'll be my experience. The person who actually got me into a track that I found helpful and healing was a friend who's a fellow life and well-being coach that specializes in that, who actually spotted that I wasn't quite myself. And she asked Fee, my wife, said, "Is Paul okay?" And Fee said, "Well, I don't know. I think so." And she said, "I don't think he's okay." And said, "Do you think he'd be okay if maybe reached out to see if he'd like to get some help, not from me, but from a friend I know who's was somebody that she trained." That's what happened for me. I said, I think to Fee's surprise at the time, I said, "Yeah, I'll give anything a go," because the stuff that I was trying and the prayer and all that, it's not that I don't believe the prayer was working. I believe that my prayers probably brought that situation around to get me into a situation where I ended up going and having my own round of counselling and wellbeing coaching. And it got me into EMDR therapy for the PTSD that I had. But that came because somebody spotted with an expertise in the area of mental health. She knew it wasn't a spiritual issue in that sense, that actually there was something going on in my mind that was trauma based.
Thank you, Paul. I think you mentioned and you covered in that quite a few of the themes that did come out, that have come out over the last couple of days. So one of them is like when we look at the why behind mental health still being a taboo, or even where it's not necessarily a taboo anymore, where people feel somehow less than because they are still struggling and because they haven't come to a place of full healing. When we looked at some of the reasons why, some of the themes that were coming out were theological, as in some of the things that we preach about that inadvertently made people feel stigmatized. But one of the big things that came out as well was overwhelm, and especially for leaders and for churches, that they want to be there to support people. They want to be a church that's welcoming. They want to remove the stigma. They want to remove the taboo. But in all honesty, they just don't know how, and they just don't know what to say, and they don't know what the kind of the appropriate responses are. So to get hyper practical, Draz and Tasha especially, thinking about your experience and thinking about the times in which you have found people's responses unhelpful, what are some of the things that, if somebody is feeling overwhelmed, if you've got a pastor that's feeling overwhelmed, or a small group leader, or just someone that you're standing next to in church, and you start to share a bit about your journey and they just don't know how to respond, what are some of the practical things that people can do that are actually helpful?
Russ, want to go first?
Well, I can. This is a difficult one. I know for the first when for the first time I met someone who had mental health issues, I genuinely didn't know what to do, and I even thought they just make things up. That's not something what's bigger than them. That's perfectly within their will. They just need to change it, and they can't see the truth. So why are not getting better? They are not getting better, and that was I'm sure I wasn't the only one in the body of church of the church who is just perfectly unqualified, but feeling the urge and necessity to verbalize their opinion, which is absolutely unqualified and perhaps harming. So I think this is I think people should be educated. And what Paul said, I realized, what I said wasn't. I just kind of described the section. Now, if I should kind of put it together, we should fight on all fronts which we can to win the mental health issue. So, and Paul has been with me, so he knows me very well. But the counseling or sessions or these things with qualified people, in cases which are kind of progressed, I think it's necessary. We normally don't have tools to handle it ourselves. We need someone who knows where we are and what would help. And even a small step up and another will get us over. And once we see that we are heading the right direction, then our faith even grows, and then we can get better. So I think that currently the biggest enemy in the church, as far as the mental health issue, is a lack of knowledge about that qualification. That I would say that's a problem, because if you've got a person who you trust and the person has no knowledge of these things and gives you an advice with the best intention in the heart, which is just wrong advice, that's harming the person. That definitely will not help.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Draz. Just to piggyback off what you've said there, it is so true what you said. I just don't feel like the church is equipped. You see, when I had that encounter with Jesus before, when I struggled with, paranoid schizophrenia and depression and anxiety and everything that went with it, because I had such a massive encounter and it was all done in one go, it was like, oh my gosh. And then I went into church and I didn't, had to deal with that, if that makes sense. And then when 2022 came, I've got to be honest with you, I kept a lid on it for the first 2 years. Nobody knew that I was dealing with suicidal thoughts. Nobody knew that I was dealing with mental health. Nobody knew that I was dealing with depression. And as Paul said, it's a win just to get out of your bed some mornings, But in the end, I had to, and maybe that was a little bit of pride in me too, because it is when you have founded a ministry, God's given you a ministry to steward and you're working with other people. I was like, oh my gosh, who can I turn? Who am I going to speak to? Oh my gosh, how can I be helping other people when I'm just, do you know what I mean? And especially when it's the attack on the mind as well. So I kept a lid on it. I put on a brave face and I carried on. And in the end, it was like, you know what, I need help. I put the white flag up. Someone needs to help me. And it was then that I realized that it's very stigmatized in the church. And I felt really embarrassed about it because I just don't feel like the church is equipped. I don't, and that's the truth. And that's me speaking, still kind of walking out of the back end now, seeing the light, with walking through this. And again, what Draz has said, people with the best intentions, bless their hearts, will just say, well, where's your faith? Why are you not praying? I have fasted. I have fasted myself so much that I nearly fell down a drain sideways if I'd have walked past a drain. Do you know what I mean? I have prayed. I had, gone to certain people. And then I realized at that point then that I needed extra help with people that were equipped. I had to work out whether it was a wound. And this is another thing. How deep can we go on here? It's like, I think because the church as a whole have so many different denominations, and they all think different things and they're all teaching different things. It's very hard because some Christians will say a Christian can be demonized, Obviously, we can't be possessed because we're sealed with the Holy Spirit, a seal is a seal. But we need to work out then, and we need to work with Holy Spirit to work out whether it's a wound or a demon. And that's the truth, you know, because you can't cast out a wound and you can't heal a demon. Do you know what I mean? So I had to go through a deliverance. And then out of the deliverance, it's always in the maintenance. And I had to learn to maintain that deliverance, because you can go and get your healing, and then all of a sudden you get a pain back. But if you come into agreement with that pain, all of a sudden, do you know what I mean? It's like you have to maintain that deliverance. And that's what I've had to do. I've had to be in my word. I've had to, you know, do a Romans 12:2 renewing my mind, because I had literally gone into such a dark place after I knew my marriage was over, that I didn't think I was going to get back out of it again. And that's the truth. And so I learned just to be quiet, because the church just isn't equipped in that way, unfortunately. And everyone believes different things. So then I'd go and speak to somebody else, and then they're saying, oh, no, it's this. And then they're saying that. And it's so confusing. It's just like, you know what, God, I need you to help me. You've got to help me, like, in my mind. And I found a lady, and she's a close friend of mine. And she's been absolutely amazing with picking everything back and helping me in my mind and my thought. It's mostly my thought process, and that's the truth. With that, you know, but again, because like you say, if it's a pastor, if it's a leader or anyone like that, nobody wants to be honest, do they, that they're struggling in that way? We don't, you know. So yeah.
Thank you, Tash. Paul, both Tash and Draz have touched on, in sharing that experience, they've touched on loads of the themes that were coming out over the last couple of days. And I know you were furiously making notes on Tuesday and Wednesday. So is there anything you want to, like, there's a few things that they've said that just resonate so much with what other people were saying. Is there anything you want to think about or reflect on?
Yeah, again, just listening to Draz and yourself, Tash, again, it's showing that there is certainly more awareness and consideration now around mental well-being in the church, because as we heard across the last 2 days, and from what you're saying, people are looking at it. So we're getting better, and it's obviously on God's radar. I think what stands out to me is that we, as churches, could be, and certainly some churches need to be more intentional about watching out for mental health and well-being, being just generally a part of our general well-being. You know, just like if somebody was limping around the church, you'd probably ask them if they were all right. You know, if somebody's maybe not quite themselves, or you know that they're going through something, is to be proactive in asking the question, and also to let people know within the culture of churches and organizations that, one, yes, you're part of the community. You know, Draz, you would still be part of your community if you broke your leg, wouldn't you?
Indeed.
You might not be able to go out and mow the lawn, but you're not excommunicated. But I think how people feel sometimes when they're going through something with their mental well-being is that I think Haley mentioned it on the Monday, called it being benched, and Will said, you know, that you can feel like you're in the waiting room, that you're no longer useful. And so what stands out to me is to be intentional and to let people know within the community that we want to encourage them and help them to restore hope. And as Will said on Monday, rather than being obsessed, or to give an impression of being focused and obsessed on being instantly healed or the healing, but actually to help people focus into the process with God and within the community, to be able to go on a journey of healing. Like, you remember when Paul Benja spoke, he talked a lot about mental fitness when Paul spoke on the talkathon last year. And that's something I really try to embrace. And I think as church, if we look at that, if you look at fitness, then basically your fitness, even if you were a pro athlete, your fitness is going to up and drop. I knew that as a soldier. You weren't always, you know, at it 100%. And to be intentional with, like I say, introducing into the culture that discipleship element of it, encouraging people that, you know, to be hopeful and to keep going. and to come alongside. The other thing, just to tie off, that is from what everybody's been saying over these 3 days and the conversations that have come out of that, is it's not even that a lot of churches maybe have any stigma against mental health. That actually one of the main things is that most people who volunteer or work as pastors in churches are very, very time poor. And so maybe part of the intentionality of that is, how do we carve time? Is that through doing things like Keys to Freedom groups, or is it doing committees or community? I mean, just previous to this call, I was in the office lounge with our team, because one of my colleagues is now moving into something new, and we all just sat down and chatted and talked, and we were talking about highlights of her time here. And as I sat there, I thought, this is community. People were encouraging each other, with sharing how some things have been difficult, and it just made me think of what you'd said, Bryn, about what does community look like. And I think if we can do more of that in the church, then that'd be great.
Well, let's stick with that thought, and let's go there. Let's look at community and how we can be intentional about doing community better. Draz, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because you obviously you live in a Catholic community. You live with a bunch of fellow other Catholics. So my guess is that your experience of community is slightly different to that of mine, that of Paul's and that of Tasha's, in the sense of you guys are literally doing life together. And I'd be really interested to hear what are some of the things that you've learned from that actually, if churches could start to do, start to kind of build upon or borrow some sort of themes and ideas, would actually create more healthy environments, or at least just reflect on what the benefits of living in community are.
Mm-hmm. This residential life is really a specific thing, because there are 10 people who committed their lives and hearts to the Lord, but the personalities are quite different, and the different backgrounds. We've got in this house, we've got people of kind of, let's call it Eastern European origin. We've got some English people. We've got some Asian people. So we've got a mixture here, age as well as backgrounds and stuff. We've got a couple who are Hindu converts, and so for them, for example, that was quite funny. When they said, we asked them, how do you celebrate Christmas? And she said, I don't know. We never celebrated Christmas when we were children. So we are all sorts of kind of backgrounds here. But what works in our community is to one thing is to share. Once a month, we've got a evening kind of social when we share where we are at. We share about the community life, we share about the family life, we share about our prayer life, up to the extent I can share, and just for the others to know where you are. And then, I see, okay, this sister, this brother, well, is struggling with this and that. And then when I see that person doing this or that, which is sometimes slightly out of character, as I know the person, then I can have mercy and say, okay, there is something else. And the primary killer of communion is judgment. Never judge why people do what, because 99% you are wrong, because the projections we have are mostly negative. But all the people you live around, and I bet that applies to you, is the people have good intentions. They don't want to take an advantage of you and get something better for them on your expense. So that's why what helps us is to allow people to be who they are. And if they are in the place where they are kind of in the middle of turmoil in their hearts and they really can't figure out what's what, then allow them and love them. So, we do communal cooking for each other every evening. So where one family cooks for the rest of the house, and the sister who was cooking before me left all the big gastronome trays on the counter, kind of with perfectly burned potato leftovers and bit of chicken and this, and her job was to clean it, but she didn't. And I firstly was like, "Ugh." But then I realized, hold on, judging again, you know. And then I said, and our founder in the community, she said, you know, if you can't do things from love, don't do them. And I asked myself, can I clean these dishes? Can I wash the trays with love, even though inside of me, where is justice? This and that. I said, I can't do that. For this time, I can do that. So, and I did it. And she was happy as a Larry because she genuinely forgotten, or she had other things in the mind. So what helps to live better life in the community context is, you know, refrain from judging. It's always bad unless you are the boss who is in charge of, you know, those people. Then you are called to judge. And the other, be yourself and be merciful with the others. If the people do want to do well, especially, we are all volunteers. We are not getting paid wages. We've got some allowance to live off, but it's not like if I work harder, I will earn more. That's not how it works. And in your context also, many people do work because they love what they do and they believe what's the mission, and they want to do the best. And sometimes we just don't see it, but be merciful, don't judge, and look at your sins first before you look at somebody else's.
Yeah, Draz, I absolutely love that. I think what you've just described there, at some of the things that you do and has made community work, are some of the things that were coming up yesterday and on Tuesday that we need to be intentional about. So intentional about diversity. It was one of the points that Will Vanderhart made, was that the best way that you can, as a church, make sure that everyone feels welcome and knows that this is a space for them, is to make sure that there is diversity within the church, that you've got lots of different types of people on lots of different parts of the journey, because then people will always come in and see themselves reflected somewhere, which I think is really important. You talked about the intentionality of creating space for sharing, because one of the things that came through, and Ellie Gage said it, who's the CEO of Kintsugi Hope, which is another Christian mental health charity, she was saying, we all know it, that actually all that anybody wants is to feel seen and heard. That if people feel seen and heard, they feel valued and accepted. And to create that space within the community, make sure once a month everyone feels seen, everyone feels heard, they've got an opportunity to share, it's just so valuable. So I absolutely love that. And then the other one was creating judgment-free space, which is absolutely crucial, because there's no point creating space for people to be seen and heard and then following that up with some sort of judgment about what you have seen and heard, because it completely undermines it. So I think there's such core principles. I really love that. We're going to wrap up in a couple minutes, but because I've got something to share at the end. But Tasha, I just wonder if you could kind of give us any of your final thoughts around things to be intentional about. So we've talked about diversity, creating space for sharing, not being judgmental. Is there anything else that you think we should be really intentional about?
Yeah, I think what I've learned from 2022, when I was trying to keep a lid on everything up until now, is be accountable. Have someone you know you can trust, because most of those belief systems that I then started to believe and whatever else were lies, but to me it became my truth. And I thought, oh my gosh, yeah, I am a failure. Oh my gosh, this is the end. Look at your life, Tash, look where you've come from. And I feel like when we're accountable and we've got people around us, a good circle of people, you know, it really, really helps to be accountable to them. Do you know what I mean? To say, actually, this is actually what I'm actually thinking right now. Yesterday was a good day, but I might have 3 bad days. Do you know what I mean? And so just to have that circle and accountability of people, whether that's in the church or whether it's brothers and sisters that you know, and having, like Draz said, that community doesn't always have to be actually in church, but it can be a group of people that you just trust, that you know, that knows the Lord, that has the best interest for you. you know, at their hearts, just to walk the journey with you, because it is a journey. I honestly thought, like, when it first started in 2022, it was going to be like, was it? I was going to go in for prayer and I was going to be, and it hasn't. It's been a journey, but along that journey, I've learned so much about me again, and about Jesus as well, about how faithful he is and how much he does love us, and, you know, different things like that. But I wouldn't have been able to walk it without, again, the community of people God has put around me, and me being honest about it. Because at first I felt embarrassed. I felt really embarrassed. Whereas now I can phone up the phone and say, today, this is, you know, this, and this. So yeah, just having that accountability, and again, that community, definitely.
That's amazing, Tasha. Thank you. So yeah, I think we've got 10 minutes left, and what I would love to do is just spend a bit of time thinking about how we could be really practical with some of this stuff. And one of the things that we are going to do off the back of this is to launch a mandate and a commitment to the UK church that's kind of reflecting on a lot of the stuff that we've seen and we've heard. And one of the questions that we've recognized that we need to ask is this: are we ready to respond not just to the needs of others, but also to our own needs for healing? And I feel like it has to be both, doesn't it? Because I think one of the things that you said, Tasha, that you experience, which is where you feel like you need to keep a lid on everything, is actually the experience of most leaders. So most leaders in a church environment will feel the need and the pressure to keep a lid on their insecurities and their doubts and the things they're struggling with, because they feel that responsibility for others. You felt it as a responsibility as a church, as a charity leader, and, you know, somebody that was leading your own foundation. But church leaders feel that all the time. And one of the big challenges is how we lead from vulnerability, and how we actually give ourselves permission to not just keep the lid on stuff. So I think we need to, as Christians, as, you know, people that are navigating this stuff, if we've got any hope of changing the landscape, we have to ask that twofold question. It's, how are we ready to respond to the needs of others, but are we also ready to therefore acknowledge our own needs and to go on our own journey? And yeah, we're going to be posting the kind of that mandate out on social media. But the question that it's going to follow up with is, will you join us? Will you join that mandate? And because we really want to, here at Mercy, facilitate a movement of people, a movement of leaders, including all of us here at Mercy, that want to agree to a couple steps. So I'm just going to read them out, because I think behind all of those, there's also some action points that we can think about taking. So the first is, I agree to take responsibility for my own pain. And that is really something you touched on, Tasha, that realization that we need to be honest with ourselves. We need to be honest with what we're journeying. We need to realize when actually there's things that we have got that in the back of our kitchen cupboard, in our minds, that are unresolved, that we've left there, that we've neglected, but actually are having unintentional consequences. So they're impacting the way that we minister, they're impacting the way that we do community, they're impacting our relationships and our friendships and how we parent. We've all got that stuff at the back of our cupboard that we need to deal with and look at. And so we need to be prepared to go on that journey. And that often means being honest and putting our hand up for the first time and saying, yeah, I need help. I'm actually really struggling. I think step 2 is acknowledging that there is a lot of pain and hurt in the church, which sounds like a funny thing to say, but I think we're often afraid to admit that, because we want people to see the church as being the answer to the problems, an answer to the world's problems. And so we can feel like we need to kind of hide the pain and the hurt that exists within the church, and hide the pain and hurt that the church has caused, which is part of the reason why we wanted to have these conversations. And we started off asking that question, is it still a taboo? Because we wanted to create space for saying, actually, yes, it can be. And we need to take some responsibility for that as a church. And then we also want to just invite people to say, yeah, I want to be part of the solution. I want to be part of seeing the body heal. We need to do the first 2 bits first. We need to take responsibility for ourselves and acknowledge that there is a problem. But then we want to turn that into action and actually be part of journeying alongside others. So we just want to thank everyone that has journeyed with us over the last few days. We've asked some really big questions. We've touched on some huge topics that are going to take a lot more unpacking. And if you have got to the point of going, this is great, yes, I acknowledge that there is stuff going on in the church, we need to do something about it. I know that there's some things that I need to do. I've got some action points for you. And obviously here at Mercy UK, we are intentional and try and be intentional about navigating this stuff and tackling this stuff. So we're also means we've got some solutions and we've got some things that you could do starting tomorrow. So here's some potential action points that you could take. So if you, with that first one, I agree to take responsibility for my own pain. If you recognize that there is stuff that you haven't dealt with yet and that you need to go on a journey with, it's why we develop Keys to Freedom. It's a workbook that you can journey through yourself or with other people. And what it provides you is a structure and it provides you with language. So one of the themes we've had coming out over the last couple of days is that most people just feel overwhelmed because they don't have the structure and they don't have the language to tackle this stuff. And Keys to Freedom is a way that you can do that. So if you are a pastor or a leader and you're thinking, yeah, I really want to help, I've got someone in mind that I know I would love to journey alongside, but I've got no framework to do that, Keys to Freedom provides you with that. When it comes to acknowledging that there is pain and hurt in the church, a lot of that it's about education. It's about being trauma informed. It's about being prepared to confront the difficult conversations and not shy away from them. So if that's you, we'd love to invite you to join our mailing list if you're not already. Every other week, we tackle one of these big questions: faith and depression, faith and anxiety, faith and burnout, faith and disappointment. And we tackle it head on in a way that is trauma informed, but also honors faith and honors the fact that we know that there is potential for healing, that prayer is powerful. We try and get that balance right of owning the difficulties, owning the tensions, and pointing towards where our hope can be. And if you want to go, yes, I really want to be part of the solution here, I really want to agree to help the body of Christ healed, we would love to invite you to partner with us here at Mercy. We are a group of people that are doing as much as we can to host these conversations and to work with people on the front line to see people's stories turned around, really. So there's loads of ways in which you could join Mercy. We'd love you to pray for us. But also, practically speaking, everything we do is delivered completely free of charge because we don't ever want finances to be a barrier. So one of the things that you could do is to think about donating, because it enables people to go on a journey, enables people to get the help that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. So yeah, loads of practical things. Keep an eye on our social media. We'll be putting out the mandate for the UK Church, which will hopefully summarize a lot of the things that we've talked about today. And we want to keep having the conversation because it is such a vital conversation. And one of the things that was said yesterday was that we're at a real tipping point where mental health is being talked about so much in society, and we've got a choice as a church. Do we try and play catch up, or do we try and lead the way? And we really want to make sure that that we are leading the way in this stuff. So please stay part of the conversation. Don't shy away from the difficult topics. Stay in touch with us here at Mercy UK because we'd love to navigate this together and figure out how to really change the landscape when it comes to faith, mental health, and the church. So thank you so much for joining us. Please take some time to watch the other conversations if you haven't already. And thank you today to Draz, Tasha, and Paul for joining us, for sharing their stories, for being vulnerable, for demonstrating all this stuff in action. Yeah, we really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.